What's up everybody, Johnny over at Witchcraft Whips, and welcome to yet another video. Today I thought we were gonna have a look at whip taper, and we're also gonna find out why the fall hitch really bothers me. Roll intro! Welcome back. Now, like I said, we were gonna talk a bit about the taper of a whip, and why the fall hitch really bothers me when it comes to my whip making. I thought we were gonna start out with having a look at how my view of a whip's taper have changed over the last few years, from when I started making whips to where I am today. Like with most things in life, things change. You realize new things and find ways to make things better. A good example for that would be Nick over at Nick's Whip Shop, who's made new tutorials for his current, say, bullwhip method, or how he constructs his bullwhips today. And that's quite a bit different from the ways he were making them if you look at his earlier videos. And I think it's a real great thing, to post those new tutorials and show people how you evolve, how your construction method evolves. And Nick's channel is absolutely awesome, so check him out if you haven't already. I'll post a link down there. So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna change the camera to a kind of overhead perspective. Then we're gonna draw some more, because I know you love it when I draw. And then we're gonna have a look at a couple of whips. So I thought we were gonna start out with having a look at how I used to think about the whip's construction and taper a few years back when I was just starting out making whips. And back then I used to think about whips like this. You'd have the thong of the whip, you would have the fall, and then you would have the cracker at the tip. Now, of course, I knew that the whip must taper, and it does need to taper. The problem was that I was looking at these three parts of the whip, the thong, the fall, the cracker, as completely separate parts, and not seeing the whip as a whole. To me, making a good whip was tapering the thong from the thick end down to the fall hitch as much as possible, and just before the fall hitch, the thong needed to be as thin as possible. That's how a great whip was made, I thought. I really didn't take the tapering of the fall in consideration when thinking about the taper. And the cracker I really didn't care about, because that's just something you put on the end of the fall to make the whip crack. And one problem that my whips used to have was that they were too light at the end of the thong and the fall section, because I only focused on the thong, tapering it down really fine, and the end of the thong going into the fall was way too thin and light to crack nicely. But then I had a real aha moment. I started looking at the whip as a whole, including the fall and even the cracker. So looking at how I needed to taper the whip, I took the fall into consideration as well as the cracker. And how does one taper a nice whip? Well, to me the answer was quite clear. What you would do is you would taper the whip nice and evenly from the thick end down to the pointy end. A bit like this. Now the fall would still be here, of course, and the cracker would still be there. If you haven't figured out already, the black is the thong portion of the whip, the red is the fall, and the green is the cracker. Obviously, to me, this is how a whip should taper, because as the energy moves from the handle or the thicker end of the whip down towards the cracker, there's an even, nice and smooth taper to it. And we're gonna use a small ball to illustrate the energy moving. The energy that you put into the whip, or this ball right here in this instance, would have a nice straight slope or taper all the way to the end of the whip and the cracker. But then I ran into a problem. Where? Well, right here, where the fall connects to the thong at the fall hitch. And the problem was that when joining a fall to the thong, the wider end of the fall needs to match the end of the thong to have a nice smooth taper. But what happens when you join the fall to the thong using a fall hitch? Well, I'm gonna show you. Here we have a absolutely beautiful bullwhip with a lovely fall hitch. Now the problem I started seeing here is if the wider end of the fall matches the end of the thong, what happens in this section right here is that the material is doubled. And as the wave of energy is traveling down the thong and hits this, where it's suddenly more material, there is suddenly a big bump. Right here. That the energy has to go over to continue downwards. So for over an inch, in this case, the material is doubled. And I don't like that, because you wouldn't like a big bulge right here in the thong, or maybe over here. So why should you accept a big bulge right here? Well, I'll tell you why, because it's needed. The purpose of the fall is to take most of the abuse. If the whip was finely braided kangaroo all the way to the cracker, this part right here would wear out very fast, as it hits the ground and as it takes most of the stress from the cracking. So the fall is essential to providing a long life for the whip, given it's not just hanging on the wall. And I just want to state for the record that I'm not bashing, regular fall hitches, because they're very functional. And a bullwhip, with a regular fall looks like a real bullwhip. This is how a bullwhip is supposed to look. The problem that I have with the fall hitch is that it messes with my taper. It creates this speed bump right here for the energy to travel. Does it matter all that much? No. The whip has gathered so much energy, so when the energy reaches the fall hitch, it doesn't have any problem going over it. But still, this doubling of material really bothered me. And that is probably why I was so very impressed with the work of Alexander Jacob over at Cobra Whips, with his Dyneema falls. So we're gonna have a look at another whip. Now this is the bullwhip that I made in my making a bullwhip video. This is an 8-footer sporting a plaited Dyneema fall. Now what I primarily like with these Dyneema falls is that the whip tapers smoothly all the way down from the thong onto the fall without any fall hitches to disrupt the energy wave, and continues to taper evenly all the way to the cracker, which also tapers, by the way. Now these falls also follow the natural curvature of the whip, instead of just being a flimsy strip of leather. And speaking about taper, we're gonna do a little bit of more drawing. So, using a Dyneema fall in my case made me very happy because I eliminated this bump right here. So now the energy wave had smooth sailing all the way down to the tip of the cracker. Nice, steady, even taper all the way down. And that was how I made my whips. Then I stumbled across something called this. And I'm not even gonna try and pronounce it, but you can look it up on YouTube, for example, if you're interested. Basically, what it is a way for a ball, for example, to go from point A to point B in the least amount of time. So they would have, for example, one curve being a straight path like this. And this is the same design that I came up with for my taper, because it's the shortest distance, it's a steady increase of taper all the way down, it must be the best. Then they had a curve who looked something like this. Where the ball would drop straight down to gain a lot of initial energy on his way to point B. And then they had something called a cycloid, who looks something like this. And like I said, they would have one ball traveling along, whoops, that's an odd looking ball, but hey, going down the straight path. They would have one ball heading down this one, and one going along the cycloid curve. And the thing is that the cycloid curve was always faster. It's faster than a straight path. It's faster than this one. So I thought, well, maybe I should taper my whip following a cycloid curve. Now obviously I'm drawing this freehand, so it can't be exactly right, but you'll probably get the idea. Now what would happen is that the taper of the whip would be quite fast for the beginning of the thong, and then the taper would slow down a bit, which in my mind should allow my ball to travel down this path or the taper faster than my previous design. So the whip would taper quite fast, as I said, to around, here somewhere. And then the taper would ease out and slow down a bit. And I thought it was very interesting as I watched one of Blake Bruning's videos from his How to Have a Whipmaker's Eye series, where he talked a bit about taper. And we're going to have a look at a clip from that right now.
All of us kind of tend to do similar things. Like on this Paul Nolan, like I said, it tapers pretty fast around the quarter mark, around anywhere around this area. So it kind of tapers a little faster here, and then the rest slows down. And it's very common with this Joe too. As you can see on the Joe strain, it tapers pretty fast, which is about the quarter mark or so. And then now it slows down the rest of the way.
Now in this video, Blake is having a look at a couple of whips from well-known makers such as Paul Nolan, Casey Tyler, Joe Strain, Steve Townsend, and one of his own, not the least. And what they had in common was that they tapered quite rapidly for the first portion of the whip, and then the taper slowed down, much like this design would do, using a cycloid curve for taper. So basically that's where I'm at right now regards of my thoughts on whip taper. I just want to make it very clear that designing a whip using this straight taper works absolutely fantastic, and so does this one. The difference being that a whip designed using this kind of taper will have a bit faster action than this one, and this whip will be a bit heavier in the thong. Now these two whips that we looked on earlier are absolutely great. This one that I made, designed following this nice straight even taper, and it cracks absolutely fantastic, and I love it a lot. And I also want to make it clear, once again, that I don't have a problem per se with the fall hitch or using a traditional fall. I'm not saying that this whip is better than this one, absolutely not. But to me the taper is very important. Coming off the handle, everything must taper. That's very important to me. The whip must taper from here to here, or even, from here to just here. Even if that's barely an inch, there has to be taper there. That's very important to me when designing and building a whip. And I do make whips like this using traditional falls. I love making them, but using a Dyneema fall, having a nice smooth taper and transition from the thong to the fall gives the maker in me a real nice satisfaction. That's quite enough of a confusing rant about taper and whip construction, I think. If you have any thoughts on this, drop a comment down below and let me know. Like I said, things evolve. This is how I look at things today. There might be a change to that as I evolve as a whip maker and find different ways of making things. But that's quite enough of me for this time. Take care, and I'll see you later.